Hello, good evening. Welcome to Prime Business with me, Pius Kojo Baka. Some players in the agricultural sector are predicting prices of food will increase further in the coming months due to what they describe as ineffective policies to control inflation. Their comment comes on the back of inflation for the month of July increasing marginally again to 43.1% from the 42.2% recorded in June this year. According to figures from the Ghana Statistical Service, the rising of food and, of course, food inflation pushed the overall inflation up. Speaking at a press briefing, government statistician Professor Samuel Kobne said food inflation continued to significantly impact the overall inflation.
From both food and non-food perspective, we see an upward trend with food inflation inching up by 0.8 percentage points between June and July 2023, and non-food inflation increasing by 0.4 percentage points from 33.4 in June 2023 to 33.8 in July 2023. Disaggregating further from a locally produced item and an imported item perspective, percentage point difference between inflation for imported items and inflation for locally produced items, with imported items recording an inflation rate of 45.7% and locally produced items 37.5%. Further disaggregating year-on-year inflation from a regional perspective, the Northeast region recorded the highest rate of 64.0%, and the Greater Accra region recorded the lowest rate of 31.8%, indicating about a 2-time difference between these two regions, that is the Northeast region and the Greater Accra region. On a month-on-month basis, we saw that month-on-month inflation inched up by 0.4 percentage points, 3.2 for June 2023 and 3.6 for July 2023. Disaggregating this from a food and non-food perspective, food inflation on a month-on-month basis was 3.8%, and non-food inflation on a month-on-month basis was 3.4%.
Responding to this, the Chief Director or the Executive Officer of the Chamber of Agribusiness Ghana, Anthony Morrison, predicts prices of food will increase further in the coming months if steps are not taken to control the rate of inflation in the country.
Very surprised why government is so adamant to these issues of taxation. Myself, peasant farmers, that's the Chamber of Agribusiness, peasant farmers, and crop life protection, we have done a lot of advocacy and engagement. And our expectations were that in this whole economic restructuring, and also the fact that we are in an IMF process, government would have focused more in how to protect the food trade, the food production sector of the economy. And I think that some of these things are now affecting us, or the impact is going to be very hard on us. For instance, if you look at the World Economic Intelligence report, it says clearly that government political commitment towards food production is a major factor. So if you ask yourself, how much has government put directly into agriculture? And aside, our policies are not really aligned to our priorities. Okay, you know that we import over 1.2 billion of rice. We import over 1.3 billion of oil. We import over 1.6 billion of frozen chicken. We import almost $1 billion of frozen fish. Okay, we import over $600 million of tomatoes. We import more than $800 million of onion. Okay, the fruit juice, over 300 million. The list goes on and on and on and on, right? What is government deliberate attempt to mitigate some of these things? And besides, unemployment is going up. That is the reason why you are also seeing that the labor market gap being created. A lot of the rural folks who otherwise should be coming into the rural areas to involve themselves in the production are now in the cities. And if you look at our agriculture...
All right, Anthony, conclude your point for me in a minute.
Let me state this very important point.
All right, in a minute, please.
The National Agriculture Census have showed clearly that we have overage farmers in our census, and we also use rudimentary technologies. So if government is not making effort to bring in a lot of youth and invest into the industry, I can tell you, for the next 6 months, we are going to see a lot of food increase. Stability will come because of tomatoes. Now you are seeing the benefit of the short period that we've done production. Major season will come, but major season we've done limited because of the cost of fertilizers, inputs, and a lot of.
Meanwhile, the Peasant Farmers Association of Ghana is asking for a scrap of import duties on agro-inputs, indicating it's hurting the operations of farmers. Its executive director, Dr. Charles Nyaba, described the phenomenon as not surprising, owing to the fact that policies to support the agricultural sector have yielded a zero result.
Since we started recording food price inflation hikes, nothing has been done in 2023 for the farmer side. You know that when the previous agri minister resigned and his successor came, the Planning for Food and Jobs program was reviewed. And that's the only government policy that is supporting farmers with input subsidies. That's basically fertilizer and seeds. So when that happened, I think stakeholders were consulted, ourselves were consulted among several others. And we all agreed that the previous project was not properly implemented, leading to supply of poor quality inputs. Prices were skyrocketing. Government itself could not actually pay suppliers like those who are importing fertilizer and seeds. So there was a need at the time to actually review the policy. When the new policy was introduced, the input credit system, which was actually to replace the fertilizer subsidy program, we all welcome it due to the way the fertilizer subsidy program was abused. But since then till now, nothing has been done. We have been waiting to hear from the ministry when this program will be rolled out. We are in the third quarter of the season, but farmers haven't received anything from government. As a result, cost of inputs actually went very high. Many farmers have to reduce their farm sizes. We have majority who produce without applying any fertilizers. When all these factors put together, obviously we should expect cost of production to go up. One other variable which is even more damning is government introducing import duties on agro inputs, which used not to be the case. So you take most of the agro inputs like fertilizer, seeds, veterinary medications, farm machineries, equipment, all of them. There are instances that the cost of the input itself is the same as the cost of the import duties. So today, if you want the tractor services, what we used to do 2 years ago, you have to pay 2 times that. So once all these things are coming to the farmer will also have to save the cost to the consumer. Okay?
All right.
We should even be lucky if the farmer is able to produce and save the cost to the consumer. But in most occasions, farmers do not even produce at all. So those are the factors that are contributing to a shortage of food in the market.
Meantime, Professor Williams-Prepra has disclosed that inflation is likely to surge further if the agricultural policies are not strengthened.
So, World Bank issued a report that we should anticipate this, and also in our IMF document, it's already mentioned that the situation will get very worse before it will get better. So all these issues are going to be at play. Noticing that rice is also going to be in shortage because of the Indian policy. The Indian controls about 40% of the rice production and are sent to some part of Europe and Africa. So food prices or inflation is going to go up because of shortages. So as for that belief, I believe that is going to get worse. What I may say is that maybe the rate of increase will not be as it happened in November, December last year. Maybe the rate of increase may be marginal as we noticed between the previous month, June and July, something like that, but it's not going to be that kind of sharp. So if the government is able to address some policies, comes out with strategies to address the prices of the farm grid versus the urban market, then that kind of issue can be curtailed. But we should anticipate that inflation will get worse before it starts to come down.
Away from inflation-related stories, Chief Director at the Ministry of Finance, Eva Mens, is urging all accountants in the public sector to uphold the public financial management law to help reduce government's debt. Madam Eva Menz was speaking at the post-2023 Mid-Year Budget Forum organized by the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Ghana.
A lot of MDAs do not do due diligence when it comes to project development. And so most project costs are understated. And then when it comes to actual implementation, there are a lot of cost variations. So there are major challenges with how these arrears are accumulated. For instance, you have companies who have done work for government and are not being paid. They've taken bank loans and are unable to pay these banks. It creates bank impairment. Number two, on the side of government, we don't have good services that are delivered. And thirdly, I mean, as we speak, over 40% of all payments that we make regarding capital expenditure has to do with interest on delayed payments. So it's a very complex, multidimensional issue that we need to look at. And that's where accountants come in.
8 banks accounted for 67% of the banking industry exposure to the domestic debt exchange program. This confirms Joy Business Story in November last year that 8 banks were highly exposed to the government of Ghana bonds. According to the 2023 Ghana Banking Survey by Accounting Professionals PwC, 72% of the impairment charges recorded in 2022 were attributed to these banks. There is more in this report.
CB, Consolidated Bank Ghana, EcoBank Ghana, and ABSA recorded the highest impairment charges of 1.81 billion, 1.77 billion, 1.62 billion, and 1.61 billion cedis respectively. The banks most impacted by impairment charge as a proportion of their investment securities portfolio were Cal Bank, Prudential Bank, Zenith Bank, and First National Bank. With the terms for the restructure of dollar-denominated securities yet to be finalized, the report said it will be interesting to assess the adequacy of the credit losses estimated by banks once the terms are finalized for exchange. The domestic debt exchange program, coupled with the downgrade of the government of Ghana's credit rating by rating agencies, swung the industry into an unprecedented loss. This resulted in the erosion of the industry's asset base by 15.7 billion cedis through the recognition of impairment charges on government securities.
Now, as online transactions are growing in the financial sector, so is fraudulent activities equally on the rise. According to board chairman of ZPay Ghana, Daniel Jima, the SIM card re-registration and the Ghana card are helping to trace and minimize fraudulent activities in the sector. He was speaking at the annual general meeting of ZPay. Here is more. In spite of the rising economic shocks, ZPay managed to grow in both total processed volume and revenue from $1.9 billion in 2021 to $2.9 billion in 2022. The company indicated that it is working tirelessly to reduce the activities of fraudsters to help reduce losses. In an interview with Joy Business, board chairman of ZPay Ghana, Daniel Jima, said the SIM card registration exercise and the Ghana card is helping to clamp down on fraudulent activities in the financial sector.
We have a unique security system. We work with the cyber security agency and all the agencies, and therefore, I won't say we have eliminated it totally, but we have taken it to the barest minimum. The national identification card has helped a lot, and also the SIM card registration has helped a lot, so we can easily go back and trace fraudulent transactions. And that has helped us minimize, and we are hoping that in the final analysis we can eliminate it. The main challenge has been declarations. You know, people want to transfer money, they don't want to declare who they are sending it to. And that's a breach of the law. You know, we must be open, and people must understand that if you give a false declaration, it will be found out.
Managing Director of ZPay Ghana, Andrew Techi Apia, said his outfit will ensure the continuous flow of remittances into the country.
In 2020, when the world was running away, we decided to stay and fight. When the banks were closing, we decided to keep our doors open online so that our customers can send money and make it possible for the people of Ghana to receive their money. About 27 of us stayed in office and made sure we worked tirelessly 24 hours to ensure that remittances will keep flowing rather than panicking about death. Beyond that, of course, our usual strategies would always remain. I would also like to remind everybody that in 2020 is when we built our beautiful office building.
The company saw a growth in its assets from $20 million in 2021 to $53 million in 2022. And to some other stories, the Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research, ISE, is making a strong case for the need for government to use the e-levy transaction, or basically tax the e-levy transaction.
The Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research has been reviewing the mid-year budget and recommends some solutions to government that will address the country's budget deficit, high inflation, and concerns of stagnant growth in the private sector. Professor Peter Korte therefore advised government to take a second look at the electronic transaction levy and broaden its scope to cover e-commerce businesses whilst reducing the rate further.
The basic idea was not just to tax electronic transfers. It was a more comprehensive thought, but we have so far focused on electronic transfers, e-commerce, and then some of the businesses that are done online, and it's growing because of COVID. A lot of these businesses have flourished, and many businesses entrepreneurs are doing operating virtually. Some are operating from their homes. They have advertised and they are raking a lot of sales. So it's about time we move beyond electronic transfers and also look at e-commerce so that we can rake in more revenue. If we do so, we can even go ahead and reduce the e-levy rate whilst we tax more of the e-commerce to make up for the loss.
Also responding to the assertion that the economy has turned around the corner, Professor Korte argued there is more to be done to begin the recovery process.
Exchange rate depreciation relatively stable, but yes, we have suspended debt payment, debt servicing, and it's very uncertain to what extent the foreign creditors are going to allow a haircut. What are they going to forgive us and what are they going to ask us to pay? But I'm hoping on the balance of it all that we'll be able to afford and pay and have some stability.
Eben Sabute's report for Joy Business.
Still watching Prime Business here with me, Pius Kojo Baka, and we've got to update you with the very latest in relation to the Bank of Ghana's loss, and basically they've been justifying why we saw the loss, and my colleague George Yafe has been going through the statements issued by the Bank of Ghana to break it down for us. So George, first off, give us a brief background as to why the Bank of Ghana came up with this statement.
So if you cast your mind back some few days ago, the minority in Parliament had to hold the press conference raising some serious allegations on the Bank of Ghana's loss that they recorded for last year. And again, even asking that if the governor, they're giving it 21 days for the governor and his deputies to step down. Otherwise, they would march and picket at the premises of the Bank of Ghana. It appears the Bank of Ghana has put together a statement on this and trying to give reasons. And if you should go through that statement, first, it's sought to explain how we got here, about the country's financial situation. There was a need to carry out a debt exchange program. It was a requirement actually to get support from the IMF. And that is why they had to do this. And if you go through the statement, there were portions that the Bank of Ghana claims that even with the individual shock that they took, that was still not enough to get support from the IMF. And they had to step in to absorb those shocks coming from the IMF. And that is why it hit them badly for them to absorb that shocks of almost 61 billion Ghana cedis. So it was about whether you should allow the individual bondholders or the institution to take that expected shocks, or the Bank of Ghana had to step in. And if you go through, it says that the central bank globally, now central banks are commercial. If you go up a little bit to the statement, it gives the reason why they had to do this specifically. And it says that in line with this, the Bank of Ghana had to take this action to deal with these things and all the rest, and specifically focusing on the fact that if it had not stepped in to do that, the shocks would have been serious in terms of on the economy, and that is why they have to do that.
Well, I'm wondering why the justification now, and looking at how far we've come with the earlier explanation given by Philip Abredu-Otu. So I'm kind of wondering what...
If you go again, it appears that those communications haven't gone far, and it appears they were distorted. So putting a statement together to give a breakdown might give some clarity to all these concerns. And the bit about them not being financially bankrupt says that this paragraph says the central banks are not commercial banks. Financial outcome has very little implications for the operations of the Bank of Ghana, as supported by evidence from other central banks. Technically, the central banks cannot be solvent or bankrupt. It links to that. So again, they are trying to give the justification that despite the shocks, and some would argue that this is for the purposes of accounting, reporting, and all those things, and therefore they are sound and they are not bankrupt or insolvent as is being put out. Again, if you then, these are two statements that the Bank of Ghana has released. You go to the another one that it gives more of a breakdown to the concerns that the minority has actually released with respect to their operations, with respect to the head office of the Bank of Ghana, with respect to expenditure on certain items and why it happened to be so and all the rest. So again, this one also talks about, gives some brief statement on the concerns that the minority had with respect to why they got here, especially if you look at their concerns about the head office. They claim in that statement again is that really the structural integrity of the current headquarters that they are in is kind of problematic. And several audits that has been done suggest that they have to move out of it. Again, Ghana is also bidding to host the West African Region Central Bank as well. So it appears that it makes sense for them to have a new facility so that all these things will work for them. So if you go through this statement that deals specifically with the concerns that the minority raised, there were things about the operations of the vehicles. Firstly, that it talks about the vehicles and talks about, firstly, the vehicle maintenance expense. It's a line in generic name for expense covered for full cost of all the Bank of Ghana's operations, and not just the headquarters as well. If you scroll down again to the last paragraph of the statement, that is where they try to deal with the concerns about the headquarters, the integrity issues, and the Bank of Ghana claims in this statement that there were issues with the structural integrity of the current head office that they are in, and that is why they had to do this. So this statement to try to give certain documented response to the concerns that have been raised about the Bank of Ghana. And if you should read that one on the new Bank of Ghana headquarters, it says that structural integrity assessment conducted by the Bank of Ghana revealed that the current Bank of Ghana head office building, built by the Nkrumah government in the early 60s, is no longer fit for purpose and cannot stand any major earth traumas. The outcome of the structural integrity work was that the main building does not satisfy the full complement in even the strength. So again, it gives some fine details on that, even on the communication expense as well. The Bank of Ghana in the statement also claimed that it cuts across subscription to Reuters. You know, these are banks' data across the world and all the rest. And this was the reason why their costs ballooned and all the rest. And when you go to my journal, you get those fine details and the concerns that the Bank of Ghana is raising to respond to all these issues raised by the minority group in Parliament.
All right, thank you very much, George Yafe, my colleague here at Joy Business, breaking it all down for us on the back of that statement released by the Bank of Ghana. That's it for the bulletin. I am Pius Kojobaka. You can get great stories when you log on to myjoyonline.com/business. Prime Sports is next.